Langzo Shoge Langzo Dene Denchen Jawa Chua Sam Dangati, Nagulan Genla Dene Dene Junta, Den Tache, and Dimebig Chashela Duetang, and Dimebig, and Shichig, Pa Chichila Peninsula Duetang, the nigger Dubig and Dudugi Namsha, Java Chetatishi. In this that the nigger to Shimji to you can't mean. She over Chichik Micheti, Tinja Jawa some time Tala some time when I said the Canis to Chibi, Tinja Jawa Juma, Tinja Jawa some time didn't Nakamang Buddha Chichene to Tinja some time. That don't told another Gasa said he chick doing it to do a matter. Can't let my party, talking in Mendoza and pay somebody late to Yagi. And don't allow us to tinge Java chair. And do send the show here that the name some time to share rather.
Good afternoon. This morning we continued to look at the presentation on dependence arising. Now we have come to look at how one can reflect on dependence arising through the technique of presentation, but from many different perspectives. Taking an object that appears, recognizing how it appears as being independent, and then challenging that appearance in that investigating to see whether it is independent, which is the way that it appears, or whether it is dependent. And to establish whether it is independent or dependent, one can approach through a variety of techniques such as dependence on causes, dependence on parts, mutual dependency, and dependence on imputation. And this is the case for all phenomena. Every object or thought appears as being independent, but is actually dependent. And amongst the phenomena to investigate, the most important is the one lying at the root of all our suffering, the self. And one can approach the self through these varying techniques to establish again and again that the self, like other phenomena, does not exist in the way that it appears, but is empty of existing in the way that it appears. It is empty of being independent, but is rather dependent.
That didn't can sometimes didn't do what Janya Chile do, and Tame Tachola colors, oh, the didn't Magala, Matin, but stars at the Mindua, some place some Chile to a chick chili gurua, chick did Tame Tachole, some Tana chick dilly. Then young Anzuki, Dingy and Joa Shanla, dinner to by Shanla dinner, Rangi di you to a Shanla dinner di you to you by Rangi, Pumbo de la Shanla dinner to you by Rangi Salon Shanla dinner to you by Rangi Kiosaya, Jan Shanla dinner to you by some time. Shan said, Message Jinchimboda, Manzo Nalia, Pando Chimbo Jinchimbo shoes, Jizanda, Shan digi Bemas, Zachimboration, Jizan Shan, some gentlemen, the Yuku, Digi, Dewa the Junas and Beta, the some Shan, some gentlemen, do want that Jana and Bigim. And Jamzeda, Niji Combatella, and Tami, Anzuku, Shanle, dinner to pass some time, and Delia Jamze Comiata, Niji Comiatia, Hawato, Gale, Panto Yungurese. Tisan Denigi, the Panto, Jamniji, Kaze, some Shuchet in Agenes, some Jatam Judonalia, Sanjoko Matoyaki, Janjo Sem Givalaya, and Odich, and the Panto Chimbungurese.
We're encouraged to investigate how phenomena appear to us and to see whether they exist in the way that they appear. We need to do this with a wide range of phenomena of which the self is most important. And doing it repeatedly, we'll again and again come to the same conclusion. It does not exist in the way that it appears. No matter how many times I've sought out the phenomenon, such as the self, I cannot find an independent phenomenon at all. So therefore, it is empty of true existence, empty of existing in the way that it appears. And to the extent we gain conviction that our self is empty of existing in the way that appears independently, but is rather dependent, we can apply that understanding to the self that others hold of themselves, or how we perceive them as being other. In that, in the same way our self is empty of true existence, so too the self of others from their perspective is empty from true existence, and likewise when we perceive them as other to ourselves, that is empty of true existence. All phenomena, despite appearing to consciousness as independent, when sought, no independent phenomenon can be found, but is empty. And here we break down this division between self and other. And that then is a suitable basis for as we continue to reflect on, for example, how a consciousness of happiness arises, seeing it arises in dependence on causes, and those causes come about not only in dependence on, for example, our way of thinking and our activities, but also in dependence on others. This way we come to recognize the entwined, interdependent relationship that all beings have. That our happiness is not something that we create. It doesn't exist from its own side, nor is it solely dependent on causes that we create alone, independent of others. Rather, there is this close, enmeshed relationship with others. Our happiness, our comfort, our ease, all comes about in dependence on others. This then serves to generate an appreciation for others, value others. And this is the indispensable foundation for the cultivation of love and compassion and later bodhicitta.
Dene ngazu goyage yunden digi yunden tarpena tabada tamchi kemba gomarum shine ngazu shen kien da shanla tune yungu yobasa di yongyage kien tablam digi jubayna di top tugu yobadi sebu hago tugu yorwa. Dene gida kanshi kien segi setang tablam ganis yobade kien seyade shenchila tune se tugu yobada di segi tablam di hago yunden ngazu ge tabada tamchi kemba tobya diya 아제 겐진을 뛰네 안에 두고래 겐진을 뛰네 토프토고 봐 지사데 디토베게 탑람딩아서 하고 요도 지사데네 인자 하고 요도 안에 가는 것은 예 인간도 덴지게 남샤 제바치디 하고 거와 데네 하고 요도 데네 안에 타바 탐지키며 고바 토야리야 남냠네 제발이야 만족이 안에 닝도 블마서네 닝도 체다 안 현기 동아세야다 녀모바 균이 직방야라야 더 방비 탑람당 니수디기 차사 하고 와 인자 디방비 방바 냠네 제 방비 탑람 탑시 제발이야 배준 제발이야 닝도다 안에 셈쇼 안에 뽑아를 실리고 와세 디지선 덴지게 남자 제바지 덴지게 남자 하고 디네 라신이 두 동반이 되게 하고 요도 저게 타바 탐지키며 고바 토발라 냠네 제발라 뽑아다 현기 동아세야다 안 저기 귀엔 세야라야 냠네 제발이야 안에 뽑아다 닝도실리고 그래지래.
As we gain ever more certainty in our understanding that all phenomena are dependent arisings. Nothing exists independently. Ourself, this too is a dependent arising. Others are dependent arisings. And not only that, there is a relationship of mutual dependency between beings. No being is self-existent. No phenomenon is self-existent. And despite phenomena appearing as being self-existent or independent, nothing exists in this way. Then we can start to understand that that phenomena appearing to us as being self-existent, that appearance is wrong. It's faulty. But that wrong appearance, that faulty appearance, and certainly the grasping at it, we come to recognize can be eliminated. We're not just now recognizing this intellectually because we're hearing it in class and we're understanding it, but in our meditation experience, we are recognizing that we can start to relate to phenomena in a new way, as being interdependent and not being as self-existent or independent. This way we come to gain confidence that our mistaken perceptions, our mistaken conceptions rather, these not only can be identified, but can be eradicated. And in the process of their eradication, we gain confidence that their influence over us, this can be weakened. We come to recognize that these wrong appearances, mistaken appearances, they arise dependently, but so too, as we develop correct consciousnesses, valid consciousnesses, these too are dependent and therefore can be developed. The virtuous consciousness or the virtuous consciousnesses can be strengthened because they're dependent, and the mistaken consciousnesses can be eradicated because they are not self-existent. So thinking like this gives us confidence in the validity of this technique, and gives us confidence that we can attain freedom from our afflictions, freedom from mistaken perceptions. And moreover, through our progression towards attainment of freedom, we can be of ever greater benefit to others because we are understanding that our happiness is so entwined with others. In this way, the understanding of dependence arising serves not only as an indispensable cause for the cultivation of the wisdom-realizing emptiness, so too for the generation of love and compassion and the deep and sincere determination to be of lasting and meaningful benefit to others.
Jebu yule ki she tabatar ne yang ki duen la ta na gyume le ke na ta to kyewa ten me bar gyuru said.
Let's continue then in the text. So this morning we concluded page, I think 13 maybe. Yeah, now we're starting at the top of page 14. Although it is widely known that a result is produced from causes, let us analyze the meaning of production. If results were produced causelessly, they would either always be produced or would never be produced.
지산 셰바나시 는 제보디에 귤레티네 기고로 뭐냐라 기고로 와서 이나다 깨와서데 기유 된라 다나 세되다 지산 깨와디 된 파심주체네 제바이나 된라 파 다스 체에도 갑라 지산 규메발레 기고 깨와이나 아니 기요도 깨와디 귤레티네 기고레 규메바실 티기고 기고서 귤레티네 기고마도 규메발 기고 말레스 Gyumeba chile kewa na gale osna, and Gumene Gidi na kewa charu, Kiwi, Duen la Tana, Gumele Kena, Tato kewa chile. Tato kewa kewa temeba, Tawa meber Guru said, Yana, Gumele Kena, then Gidi na kewa janya chadu, the Gumena Gidirua. Yana Gidi na kewa janya chadu, Yana, Gune Jay making chadu, Kewa Gune mating in Chagres, Dinima do Drosso Maresor.
Here we're looking at this statement, a result is produced from causes. So as our text says, this is widely known and generally accepted. But nevertheless, let's look at this in some detail. So first of all, a result either comes about in dependence on causes or is going to be causeless. So either a result is caused or not caused. So let's look of these two, caused and not caused. We'll look at not caused or causeless first, and that is in point 1. If results were produced causelessly, they would either always be produced or would never be produced. There are these two alternative consequences if results were causeless. If production, so the term is used here as production, but in other contexts the same word can be arise, and in very different contexts the same word is born or birth. So that one we'll find in different causes. So if something was never born or unborn. But anyway, here we're using production. So if production were causeless, then production would never cease, meaning that there would be no cause to cease, because production didn't come about in dependence on a cause. Or production could never start, because there would be no cause for it to ripen. And this is because if a result is causeless, it has no relationship to a cause. And therefore, having no relation to a cause, there would be nothing to either cease production or to commence production.
Now, the Devudi Gian to Gabla, that Jebachigo, the tight castle, Jebachi to Gabla Harskiosene, that Devudi Gian to Gulchiletini Kigri, Gumebachiletini Kigri, Essaji, Gumebala Kigri, Gugiletini Kigri, as a part George Itangor Wada. That Gumebala Ki Labana, and a Q Garos and Dizinima Shevanashi. Then a getty in a Georges, called 7 men and what Gigan Chow was. She's not Maki was a Guinea or Maresne. Then Maki or Guinea, finishing body Gilali or Marathon or Tabu Mares, the Sachura dinner, got Gichawa Maradine, and it did Ganchi Marasia Chagua. She's a Gumeba like Gavana and a getty in a Gewach young horse. Yana Guinea making Chowres. Is that Dennis Ingo, Dennis Remendo as well. Is that Gedina Jawa Chagimino as a Tundor W. Yagalet Chu Bata, Denigi, Sayus de la Gidu, and the Dimesa like Gimindoas. Gedina Jawarim. That they made 10 to give me by a Chagimidoas, and the Tundor Mata Yagidoas, the Gay Tungdoas. Then they give me by Chagimino, Gedina Jawa Chagimino. Just that you may Javaina, Gundi Yungures, just that. Yana Gedina Gedi Ganchida, Yana Zaugi Gay Mevachi, Gugures. The name into Remindo was the name Mevadan as how good Walla word.
At the outset here, we're looking at production. And that's so a result, or another way one can express a produced phenomenon. So if we talk about production, something is produced. Something that is produced, or a result, is either going to be produced or result from a cause, or be produced or result causelessly. Only those two options are possible. If a result is causeless, or something that's been produced wasn't produced from a cause, then there are these two consequences. Either because there's no relationship, if something is causeless, there's no relationship between cause and result. So a result, not requiring causes, will continue to be produced. Its production will be ceaseless, because there is no cause to be exhausted. Alternatively, there being no cause, no result will ever come about, because for the same reason, causeless production, or a result that doesn't come from a cause, not requiring a cause, has no relationship with a cause, and therefore would either continuously be produced, the first consequence, or would never arise.
Kena Guletini Kioma, Gumebalaki Maras Lagruada, Guletini Kigris Lagruada. The Guletini Kiwaina and Tayan Gudela 단위 직비기 단위 직비 규칙을 기기리베 제매 된신 규칙을 기기리 해서지 어디원이 된 거다. 단위 직비 규칙을 기기리베 규단 저 규님의 제매 된신 규칙을 기기리 해서지. 제매 된신 저 규님의 제매 된신 규칙을 기기리베 규디라 나는 제보드나 단위 직보 인간 규칙을 기기리베 야나 규단 제보인 저 규님의 되겠네. 제매 된신 규칙을 기기리 해서지. Atisha, Jeme Dorje Lane Bendigo, Hingda Minila Jeme Dorje Chagruad. Mo Tatebas and Jeme Dorje. Jeme Dorje Lana Jeme Dorje, Jewa Meva, Unit Jewa Meva, Dorje Sendigo, Tat Mahimba. 제가 매겐 현시로 제가 매겐 현 제가 제가 매겐 현지는 파초들 가르치는 수쇼들 뉘어스가요 말와 제가 디니치 규디니치 기기를 가능스 기기를 해서 바 주어를 이땅 주원이 땅 거다 주원이시고 나 단위 집이 줄이게 레기나 다견 가려래서 마디 견디시고다 달래께나 랑기 오니 줍시 라리안 계고 거바 매바당스 제데 김센 직제 근데 게 짐바직 라리안 계나 투메도 대비 괜스 괜히 용을 단위 집이 줄이게 레기나 근데 양계 게 사와지 양계 게 라야지 지다 양의 안에 지게 양계 게나 게와를 된다요 말에 세지 김센이 용을 해서 괜으로서 말이 이 용을 해서 다들 되어서 꼭 하고요.
As mentioned now a couple of times, when we look at production, that's how something is produced, how a product has been produced, or to express it differently, how a result has come about, has been caused, it's either going to be causeless or having a cause. If it's causeless, it has these two faults of being either ceaselessly produced or production would never commence. So that's what we looked at in the first one, causeless production. But then if one accepts that causeless production or a result cannot come about without being caused, then one will reject the first point. But accept then that a result must come about in dependence on a cause. Or to express it differently, something that is produced requires a process of production. So here we can divide it into two further parts, and that's expressed by points 2 and 3. If results were produced from themselves, that's the second one, or the third. If results were produced from something other than themselves. So a result can either arise from itself, or something that is a product arise from itself. That's the second one, or the third, something unrelated to it. So of those two, we'll first look at point 2 and thereafter point 3. If results were produced from themselves, there are two consequences. First, it would be pointless for something already being produced. It would be pointless for something with an already established essence to be produced again. I'll read that again. This is the first of the 2 points. It would be pointless for something with an already established essence to be produced again. So that's if it's being produced from itself. And the second consequence of being produced from itself, if what's already being produced is produced again, then there is a consequent fault that its reproduction would be endless.
Dalai kena rangi ngo chupsin sidwa. Dalai kena rangi ngo chupsin sidwa. Dani chikbigi gyudan jibuni ngo chikba. Ngo chikba gyu chikle kewa ina. Ane rangi ngo chupsin si nyuguri ke sarwa res. Ke deyo res. Gyu du son. Korong gyu yuebe kablan nyuguri ke sarwa res. Chupsin si. Ke sarana ane laryan kewa goiba mebada sidwa. nyugudi gyuda yubi kapsu kye sayo na nyugudi gyudi le kye wari labna pendo sayo mares. Ama yubi kaplu pugudi yu sayo na 아마도 부부들이 깨와래라나 셔야 말와도 그 깨년에 깨사는 양재 깨는 또 나스가야 말와서 그 깨사들어서 부부디 아마도 여디가 그런데 부부디 깨사래라면은 아는 간도 부부기도 부부도 아마를 깨래라 그러와 제사디 아마를 깨라고 라고야서 민도아 가서 아마 여디가 그런데 부부 깨사래 부부 여디래서 그러와나 디나죠 그 유예베가 블라나 유내가서는 누구디 제부디 파 깨제 깨되되나 그 깨사를 줍차래서 제사 누구디 아니 유디를 깨기래라고 해요 말해서 양자 깨고 말이 산이 깨고요 말아서 깨사는 양자 깨고요 말아서 부부도 아미 고건 마 깨사는 양자 아미 고건 마 깨고요 말아 산이 깨고요 살지 깨는 이거로 받아 디서스 시고다
There are two consequences if results were produced from themselves, so self-production. We'll look then at the first consequence. It would be pointless for something with an already established essence to be produced again. So here, what is being countered is the view that something is produced from itself. A result comes from the cause. So if this were the case, the cause and the effect would have the same essence, which would mean that at the time of the cause, the effect would already exist. And that, of course, makes no sense, because if at the time of the cause, the result already exists, there would be no need for the result to then come about. So, for example, at the time of the mother, if the mother and the child were of the same essence, there would be no need for conception and birth, because the two would self-exist together, because their essence would be identical. So looking at the first consequence, it would be pointless for something with an already established essence to be produced again. So what is produced is the result, and here the consequence is the result would have the same essence as what is already established, its cause. That couldn't happen, because then the cause and the result would be existing simultaneously.
저기 누구디 제부디 끼엘라도 당보 유디 예배갑라 제부진 요 말와 제부디 요 말와 제가 제부디 매바 귀내가서 매바체 되네 그 유델라 되네 아니 제랴 제부디 양게 사바신이 기거로와 되네 지랑은 저기 제부디 귀를 깨와래라 거로와 그러와 제산 제부디 귀내가서 매바체 되는 규딜 봐 야게 땅기 전에 되는 규딜 빼내 아주 행동으로 지나 빼내 애벌로 지나 당보 사번 마답지 애벌을 제부요 말에 되는 마 행동야 체체체로 되는 매도샤 디지도 차상하다디 애벌이 규차들 와 행동 지산 디네 가서 애벌요 말와 다디 매도의 샤선 디젤이야 신의 매 애벌스키도 디규 행동 될라 되네 애벌의 살도 기고로 받아는 어디 인간도 깨스도 되는 규인에 가서 매바체 규델라 때네 제부 살을 깨바치 하고 그래. 제가 애벌 행동이 예대가 번에 애벌 개념도 예대베네 애벌 행동 될라 때네 애벌 깨와래라요. 라고요 말 와서. 깨와요 말 와서 행동으로 예된 애벌 개념도 깨되어 와서. 제가디 애벌 행동 될라 때네 깨살라 깨라고 와서 개념도 와서.
We know from our observation that production cannot be from itself. A result cannot come about from itself, because we know from our observation that there is a sequence. First there's a cause, later there's a result. When there is that later result, that cause no longer abides, no longer exists. A result, to express that differently, a result comes about independent on a cause. For a result to arise, for a result to newly arise depends on a cause. So this is the process of production. And when a result has been produced from its cause, Now the result abides, but the cause no longer abides. For example, we all recognize that apples come from causes, that apples are produced, and a cause for an apple is the seed that led to the growth later of an apple tree, and that apple tree later then bore fruit, and thereby we have the result of that seed that gave rise to the later apples. At the time of the apple, that seed no longer exists. At the time of the seed, the apple certainly didn't exist. So there is a sequence, but they do not exist together. They are not simultaneous. If they were simultaneous, at the time of the seed, one could enjoy the apple. But that is not the case. There is rather a sequence. Therefore, the result doesn't arise from itself. It's not self-produced.
Thank you, anybody. Geshe Thubten Rabten. Deshi Gyunya also Geshe Rabten. Just Gyunya also Geshe Bachik. Gyunya also Geshe Yorde ina ko yangja Gyawres, Gyomar Lavena, and the Karikun Denigi Lavena, Gyun Karayungs. Geshe Bachi Yangja Gyawena, then it to Hayomar, ko Yangja Gyawar, Gene, Gesaya Gunema, then Tibetan also launch a regular Bendigo. Just Gesina, Gesin, Larian Gena, Gesin Bajik, Yanga Gyawar Love, Sarah Gyawar Labna, then 2 minutes tell you, said Gene, Chayama, Gene, Chayama, Delva, 2 years your master. And the Apple Masona, Medoa, then the Jibu Doctor Chas and Gesarada. That the Gesan, Yanga Gyama, the winning by the reader, Meva Chadama, the Yanga Gyama. Just not Gene, Tartuas your ones, when it's in it. Just not that Kurong is said that Kurong the Lapna, the Key Simbaji, Yanga Gigri, Yanga Girilan, then again, Zoya on the Key Saragunoma, Key Saraman, then Table launch a go up like to us or in Gene, 2 minutes Tarugres, the Key Zoya and Gene, Zoya Meva Charugres.
The second point, if results were produced from themselves, has 2 consequences. So we've looked at the first consequence, which would be, it would be pointless for something with an already established essence to be produced again. So because if something was produced from itself, the result would exist at the time of the cause. Now the second consequence is, if what had already been produced is produced again, then there is the consequent fault that its reproduction would be endless. So let's read then these two together, these 2 parts together. If results were produced from themselves, if what had already been produced is produced again, then there is the consequent fault that its reproduction would be endless. So this is because the reproduction would be endless because there would be no cause to become exhausted. When a cause ripens into the result, the cause is exhausted and can no longer lead to a result. But if the cause and the result were of the same essence, produced from itself, then the cause and the result would be exhaustless, would never be exhausted. There would be no cause to be exhausted, and therefore the result would continue to appear. But we know again from our own experience this is not the case. From a seed, a tree will grow. Not limitless trees continuously growing from that one seed. The seed becomes exhausted when the result has arisen. So therefore the second fault is one of endless production or limitless production.
Now there's go habora shi kalak yor ti karsene te kalak habore ko tardu nilu tardu pa samda shi gor jiza rasin chibole gigri la fen sure sure go wasne jugi dan chiro 장xian ba sa da jera ba konjugi le gor jiza gyudi ki debu ti gyule ya gi de rasin jibi gyule ji gor jiza gyudan debu jiza rasin jigri le gor konjugi da 지난 최 건드시네 최 탐지기 라신 찌르에서 라신 찌마도요 말해서 그러다 라신 찌르디 라신 딱 봐라 유어도요 말해서 그러다 제가 라신 딱바를 요어요 말. 제가 최근 라신 지리에서.
This may well be difficult to understand because this isn't a widely held view, but there are those who hold this view, hence it needs to be countered. And there's the Samkhya school of non-Buddhist philosophy and others who hold that cause and effect have the same nature. So for them, a cause and effect have the same nature, and therefore that mistaken understanding needs to be countered. And so therefore, this second point is presented here.
지금 다 코로나주기 니 코로나주기 심주 제지 파 딱던 제네 파 제 심주지 파 제네 타르토는 라신 되는 제샤서 코로나주기 뭐 딱던 제네 녀네 샤고다 딱던 제네 파직 니고를 코로나주기 그 되는 제 타면 어디를 샤선 배 딱던 제네 샤고래 지금 텐줄벽이 최 간신은 따돈 제나 녀메로 와대시가 저게 모자로 써다 창화세다 모자세다 세다 디마드 제네 그기에서 파 따도 제대 심지 차시도 봐서네 동상지 마다 간예미도아 다 권적이 두지는 파 따돈 제지도 제지는 제 라신스 최탐지게 유단 제비 라신 가르가르가르가르서 두시도 제단도 심지 조건서 제 라신세 두 다디 라신 지그레샤 디 라신 디기다 최탐지를 캡두고도 제가 라신 지그레샤 다디 유어균의 저에메 되긴 딱와르시 되는 시도세 코로나주기 디샤고 다디 두샤도다 제가 따던 제네 추니제파 직줍되긴 직 딱 감마되고 줍되긴 장문의 줍되긴 나와시 샤고 라신 지샤고 제가디 탈도 가사게 라신 차르고 다 땡기베다나 디 가사 덴바주바데 차르고 라신도 차고래 제단 유단 제보단 가르나 디게 라신 가르이나 유단 제보 최 가르시나 디게 라신 가르시도서 라신 가르시도 심주 지에데 코로나지 지 라신 직니고 제기 샤고 제산 다 가르시나 최 차산 라신 직벌에 샤서 라신 직마도 미도서 라신 직마도 미도지 라신 직디게 차산에 캡디해 차기도 라신 직마도 미도서 저 차산게 다 라신세 직요래 세래 디지디기 미 람나 미세디 지거로 와다서 미세디기 가와 켜고서네 미세디 찍마도요 말레스 이나야 니기 미디기 라신의 가와요 차상을요래서 미 라신 지거로 와 진짜 미세디 라신 찍레스 이나야 니기디 켜야돼 가서 켜고서네 지게다 에시에다 차상을도 켜줘래 이나 미코론스 라신세디 찍레스 어디 되네 유단 제고 라신 찍레스 이나 코로나 차상에 캡되고 그래서 제가 두시네 코로나 라신 제가 딱던 제네 파 녀네 딱던 제네 딩이 직녀네 샤고를 코로나 저 지나데 고쇼다서 뭐로와 이나 라신 찍마도요 말했지 라신 권지 찍마도요 말했어 구쇼다 미다 유다 제보 그 랑신세 찍마도요 말했어요. 미세의 찍마도요 말했지. 나 차상 켜고도 와. 디나시 랑신세 찍마도요 말했지. 랑신세 저로와 랑신세 찍라래지. 니다 남추만 오다마를 리기래지. 지상 가리나 랑신 찍마도요 말했어요. 랑신 찍래서 코로나 중에 최 탐지게 랑신세 찍래서 그래.
Proponents of self-production, or production from themselves, hold that when one searches a phenomenon, whether a cause, an effect, or production itself, one will find its nature. Prasangika, as we know, will say, whatever one investigates, any cause, any result, or production or anything, one will find that is empty of existing by way of its own nature or its inherent existence. It's empty of inherent existence or empty of its own nature. That's the same term. So that here we can see a very different understanding from the side of the Prasangikas and the side of these non-Buddhist schools who hold that all phenomena exist by their own nature, and that nature is the same. across all phenomena. So for example, they would say all people, all humans, across the world, wherever they reside, whilst there are a variety of humans, when one searches, one will find they all have the same nature. They all have the same nature. So that is their view, and it is a very different view from the Prasangika, which is that no phenomenon exists by way of its own inherent existence or by way of its own nature, whereas they hold all phenomena exist not only by their own nature, but by the same nature.
Rāngshīn chīkpa māyīmbā trēmē tuñshēn chīla shēn lē kē nā sē tō chāwa gyūnī mē khīn chāwa tuñshēn chīla kē wāi nā shīng lā kē nā dō lā kē nā shīng kē wāi nā sē rō tā chū lē mē kī kūyō nā tēne gāndā sē sē chā kī rō chī sā chāwa gyūnī mē trēmē tuñshēn chīla kē wāi nā tā gyūn gā rō yō rē lām nā tī sō rā shēn lē kē nā sē tō shēn lē kē nā shēn sē tē trēmē tuñshēn sē rō trēwa tuñshēn rāngshīn kī chūpē shēn sē rō tā tuñdā lā shēn lē kē wā sē rāngshīn chūpē shēn gyūdā kiñ kāng lai mā rāng wē nē dhūp tū kiñ shēn chī lē, shēn tēne chī lē kye wā yī na, gyūyān kā rū yō rā sī na, shēn lē kye nā nī, gyū yī mīn tam chī lē kye bā mī. Tā tū, gyū yī nā yā kī gu rā, gyū mā yī nā yā kī shō rā, kī gu rā, shēn lē kye nā, kā rā sī na, shēn rā wā sī, shēn lē kye wā mī. Yā na, chē bū gyū lā tē bā kā sī, yā na chī chā, gyū dī, shēn lē kye wā na, chē mē tuñ shēn rāng shīng chū bī gyū shēn chī lē kī gu yō bā yī na, gyū yīmīn tamchī lē kye chōgu rē sī, kō kārāsān kōnyi drēbū dī kye lē gyū dī tān drēwā kōgu mī duwā sī, drēwā kōgu mē mā sān drēwā mē nā kye nā, tē gyū yīn nā kye chō, gyū mē nā kye chōgu rē sī, gyū yīmīn tamchī lē kye bī kē, tē gyū yīn chī kio rē sī, chē sān, tēne gyū yīmīn tamchī lē kye wā gyū mā yīn pā lā kye yā mā rā sī wā rā, chē sān ngā tsū tī ngō sūm kī tsā mē dhūgu duwā sī, pē nē nē rō shī na, Kurāng kī nē nyūgu dī, nē kī sāpañ chī lē tēne kye wā mā tō, 도지 마답 샤바이나 텔레니 기그 민두와스 제사 뉴구다 뒤치디 규마인 발라 메케와데 가서 세바하고 고구두와스 제사 결혼 삼다나 샤바이나 랍타나 샤바이나 제메 된신 규지를 기기나 되는 규마인 나야 될 게랍 쪽으로 와스 견되는 연구를 해서지 무슨 거래 지바 담보 규민 개와 규메 가서 아니 참에 아니 템지 개와 써야
It's mentioned at the outset that a result, or something that is produced, either comes about causelessly, and we looked at that through the first point, or it comes about in dependence on causes. And if it comes about in dependence on causes, we refuted first if the production from itself, and now we come to the third point, which is if the results were produced from something inherently existent other than itself. So this too has two consequences. Right? We'll look at the first one here. If results were produced from something inherently existent other than themselves, they would be produced from everything, both from what are considered to be their causes and from what are not considered to be their causes. So if someone holds that something that is produced from a cause, but that cause is an inherently existent other, it means they would have no relationship at all. For example, a tree could come from a stone. Water could come from fire. Because fire and water have no relationship. A stone and a tree have no relationship. But we know this isn't the case. For example, a crop of barley, we know can only be produced from barley seeds. A crop of barley cannot come from a stone, and likewise, a seed of barley can only produce barley. It cannot produce anything other than barley. So we see here that if results were produced from something inherently existent other than itself, it would be produced from everything, both from what are considered to be its causes and from what are not considered to be its causes.
세상 마대바 말에 유면에 기입니다. 규대 뛰어바든 가서 하고도 와서 세상 네 결혼 랍탄 제바이나 제보디 규라 마대바 차로 그랬어. 뛰어바데 가로 그랬어. 마대바 차게 됐어.
Now the second consequence, if results were produced from something inherently existent other than themselves, it would be contradictory for results to depend on others. It would be contradictory for results to depend on causes, on causes. So this is because if the effect is truly existent, and it can be produced from a truly existent other, then because of the nature of true existence, which is, if something's truly existent, it's independent. So how can an independent result come from a cause which itself is also independent? They would have no relationship with each other. And having no relationship with each other, results depending on causes is contradictory. Again, because results and causes would be independent of each other. Therefore, it would be contradictory to say a result comes from a cause.
Dalai kiwa mare, shenle kiwa chekminuas, inza nigale kiwa mares, dada shen nigale kiwa mares, kiwa mitebes, Dalai kina kyun dene de yungdua, shenle kina ne dene de kyun yungdua, ne yumebale kina kyen dene de yungdua. Inza dada shen nigale kiwa rebesne, dada shen Dalai da jibuli kiwa mare, shen jibuli kiwa mare, 다다 신 니가를 깨와래서 라바네 대개와 책임 말해서 니가를 깨와 민배 미태배 진 미태반자 아니 가르스네 되네 인자도 두시는 깨와서야 돼 봤다던 제나 샤도메스 두시 깨와서야 돼 간스키도 달래 끼우대 샬라 끼우대 다다 신 니가를 준비해발 끼우래 두시 제바 제도 깨와서야 돼 다던 제나 니해매요 말 니도 말했어 샤메스 누구 제보디 기도 간스 기도 세도 귤이 기도에 유메바질 기도 세 제바체 귤이 제바나 그 다니치비 규실이 기도에 제메 된신 규실이 기도에 두 제바체도 지상 제바체도 제도 되는 귤이 제보디 제나 니에기네메 예다한테 니에기네메가 차르고 됐어.
For those then who have accepted that results don't come about causelessly, and therefore accept that they must be caused, it's been established that they cannot be produced from themselves. A result cannot come from itself, nor can a result come about from something inherently existent other than it. But if that person then is still holding on and not coming to the right understanding, they may say, but a result can come from something that is both itself and other. And that then is the fourth point. For these reasons, production from both self and others is unfeasible, illogical. So what the fourth point means is, as things aren't produced from self, number 2, and things aren't produced from others, number 3, they can't be said to be produced from both self and others. Because from both self and others have been refuted in point 2 and then point 3. So it's already been refuted. So now one can't say, oh well, maybe it comes from self and other, when it has been established it cannot come from self and other. So therefore, when one searches to see if it comes from self and other, using the same reasoning applied already, one will see no such truly existent results can be found, nor truly existent cause or production.
가르 순고르세나 돈나라 라신 줍드힌 규지를 깨와 말해서 or다 돈나라 라신 규디 갈라야마도 랑원이 줍드힌 규코론 규어균에 줘야 매디긴 데네 규지를 때네 제부 끼어요 말레스 제가 디 규디 라신 주비교 제가 라신 주비 주비긴 규를 때네 제부 끼어요 말레스 제가 데니기 제바체도 데니게 라신 주비기 규를 때네 제부 끼기 말에 제부 거라야 라신 주비 규를 때네 끼어민도 제가 데네 인자 다돈 자외지나 라신 주비 규를 제부 끼에면 끼어와디 니에민도 니민도 니에요 말레스 제대다 가실래 유라신기 마주바 델레기베 제부디야 라신 주요 마 다돈 제외치는 예요 말레스 제가 두신의 심지체데 다 돈달라 텐유비 가르송으로는 유심 제규레 제부 깨와디 파 아니 제부 코론 유라 되는 유코론야 현실을 되는 줍티가 줘 현실을 되는 줍티가 규칙라 안 제부디 규텔을 되는 줍고레스마도 데네 칸라에 마되바 아니 규칙을 되는 유기가 말해야지 돈다지 송거다
What is being presented here is that nothing is inherently existent, nothing that is produced is inherently existent either, and nothing can come about from an inherently existent cause. Or to express that last bit differently, an inherently existent cause cannot lead to a result. So one can appreciate the same point from two angles, or from two sides. An inherently existent cause cannot lead to a result, or a result cannot have come from an inherently existent cause. Because if something were inherently existent, or existed by way of its own nature, that's just another way to express it. If something exists by way of its own nature, it is independent, unrelated to everything else. So it cannot lead to a result. Equally, a result cannot come from it. Therefore, Prasangika will say that a cause is dependent on its result and a result is dependent on its cause. There is a relationship of dependency between cause and effect. Neither are independent.
Dege duyang pawal rupke zawa shereble sidera digi dade dondadi dire zawa shereb na la karsun yorasene dale mayin shele min nile mayin gyume min mobo kanda kana ya jewa na me yo mayin se.
This then is summarized by a quote from Arya Nagarjuna. Neither from itself, nor from another, nor from both, nor causelessly does anything whatsoever arise anywhere, ever.
This is a temple drupa, Kasu Tinjin, Tewa Chua, some de Gacha, temple drupa, Rashin drupa, Kaya delia, some Dana, Tinjin, Tinjiki, some Tache, Dijin to Sugar Shepa, Kasanta, Sugar Shepa, Tinjiki, Namja, some Tache, Gacha, Rashin drupa, Gata, Chikche. That Daddy Kasuri, di Paget Dorje Sigme Tensi Minstag, Kaji Teniki Tensik Daddy, Dale Kia, Shenle Kia, my Dale Kinakin, Danichi Biculatin, Kin Dine Yungudu, Shenle, Jeme Tenshin, Gushelatin, Kinek Dine Yungudu, Gumeba Latine, Dine Dinistu, and then Nigala Kiela, Dada, Nigala Kiwana, Gun Dine Yungris, and Doos in the Jeva Cheche, Ranshin Tubaka, Chiche. That got Ranshin Tubaka, Ripa, some Tanta Ripa. And Dina Shenda, Ajik Chikdurek Tense Sayura, Temple to be Chikta, Dumakaya, maybe Chikta, Durek Tense. Chik Durek Tense Sayura, Chikta, Duma, Chikia Mare, Temaya Mare said, Temple to be Chikia Mare, Temple to be Dumaya Mare, then there's some Tache, Temple to be Gacha Gata Chiche. Daya Yubale Kiva Mare, Mebale Kiva Mares, and Dusine Cheba Chitachin, Chesati, Demba to Cheta, Cheba Chela Kachagi, some not on Cheba Chita, Ribalmas, Miro, Mahuti, Descent Mason, Zoro, the Ripa, the Niki, Descent, Shiro, soon that Uma, Zawasher, Chasan, Zawasher, not soon you're ready to Chasan. Chikdan Duma. Chesate Temple Drupa Gacha, Gata, Delia, Ripa Samata, Ripa Miro, Samtana, Mangu, or Reche. Dorje Sime Tensi, 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 Jitude, Tensi, and then you make your Tensi set your word. Or this one to get Mazawashir Nalia, Gacha, Temple Tupaka, Ripa, some Tana, Jebacheta, the Nigi Ripa, all Mason, the Nigi, she soon shared. That it didn't that it is just what Dorje Sime Tensi set Chagore. As a Tenji or Kishi, Kasana, didn't teach us Chashela Dune, Jugore, Chashesana, Neva, Chadugore Sada, and the Jig Gulatine, Kigre, Chashela Dune, Jugore, and then did you sugar pencil Dune, Dengor, said Tenji Kishi or did it Tenji or what?
Here we see this quotation comes from Nagarjuna's text, Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way. So this text presents these same techniques that we've been looking at. First, to identify the object that is to be negated, or the object to be refuted, the true existence. And then it presents a variety of techniques. And we've been looking at these for some time, in particular this weekend. So now we've just looked at a technique which is often called the diamond slithers, which looks at production to see that how do things come about? Is it causelessly or caused? And if it's caused, does it come about from itself, as some non-Buddhist schools assert? Or does it come about from an inherently existent other? Or does it come from a combination of self and other? And through this technique of the diamond slithers, those four possibilities are eradicated. And one sees that a phenomenon cannot exist causelessly, or from itself, or from an inherently existent other, or from both self and inherently existent other. What we've looked at previously, which was the technique of one and different, or one and many, this too is presented by Nagarjuna in his Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way. And these techniques we can utilize through what we've been looking at throughout this text, and is also included in Nagarjuna's Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, which is the technique of dependent arising. We looked at that last night through the 7 extremes, looking at dependent arising then and this morning too. Looking at dependency through causes, through parts, imputation, and mutual dependency. So here we're seeing a variety of techniques to utilize in meditation, as well as in our daily life, to negate true existence, or refute true existence.
고하고라 책도와 대안은 간주 지금 둘로죠 제대로 미니간주 즉 머니 파신 나라 얘기를 또 우마나 얘기를 돼서 되니기 대선들리도 그런 아니 지금 베레 제 슈야레 안 주처라나 저기야레 버진 님의 종아스 대선질이야 아니 님의 종아스 다오직스로 되니기 곧 전에 집어 있는 돌아야체다 되니기 제네 지고로와 진짜 되니에서도 두스데 디조양 지게 아주게 콜 파조 현다게 삼는 땅하디 삼는 데니실이 땅 콘조 삼는 데니시 삼 땅고라서 삼 땅하디 아주게 직하고 와제 다 텐규비 파가도 코 금천데 디진에 디차로 거서데 텐규비 데니치네 가고라서 비그 가항로제 차사로제 야고라서 텐규비게 랑신이 두바세다 파주게 랑신 두바세데 시엔세데 그 samlo gandhi chile gongwa shigube du chine simjuk cheje an pa chige rat chika tha ji chine an ta ta la chi tes ha go ma je le lo la chi ke yo mar da ka le ha go wa de ka cha chamo ni za.
Those of you who have a good understanding of what has been said here, that good understanding will have come about not just in dependence on what has been said this weekend, but in dependence on many years of hearing teachings on this, reading books on this, and reflecting on it. Those of you who are not sitting here with a clear understanding of what has been said, It's not at all surprising, because these are subtle points, difficult to grasp quickly, certainly difficult to integrate well. When we study these texts in the monastery, we spend a lot of time on each point. We all spend between 2 to 4 weeks on each point, debating it, reading about it, looking at from the perspective of the view holder of each particular point, as well as the perspective of the other tenets, in particular Prasangika, again and again with different illustrations, different contexts, seeing how the holder of each particular point of view would respond in different circumstances, and how a different tenet holder, again in particular Prasangika, would respond in these different situations. And we spend weeks on each point. And that is an indication that to come to get a good understanding takes time and repeated effort. So therefore, if this is appearing a little bit abstract or a little bit unclear, it's not surprising, because these points are subtle.
gyule kewa de shenle gigire shenle gigore sungura dinajin chirubo koron zugena ene shenle gigire sigurwa da ben nyugudi nyugoro benengaze ne nyugurubshina sabole kiwanza 지산 사변도 누구 말어와 지산 사변도 누구들의 셴르와 지산 누구들 사변들의 깨완사 사변 코로나의 셴 비치를 깨와래서 셴을 깨와래서 시그루와 지산 랑규바에 기네 누구들의 셴을 끼고래라고 샘잠비게 셴을 끼고래라고 다 제라마 도데바네 셴을 끼고래라고 데 치료받으서는 셴을 끼고래라고 그 건축에 셴을 끼리에서 잠다다데 가르순고로서는 지산 누구디 가서 셴을 끼에서디 사본치리 끼고래서 사본은 누구 말해서 사본은 누구래 셴레스 지산 코로나에 셴베치리 끼기도 해서 셴을 끼와래라고 부디 아마디 부 말와서 지산 부 코로나에 셴베 아마치리 끼고라 지산 부 코로나 셴을 끼와래서 디나지 애벌도 마손 애벌디 행동디 애벌 말와서 지산 애벌 코로나 행동한 코로나에 셴 행동지를 끼와자 셴을 끼와래서라고 고주 셴을 끼와 미김선 누구랑래 셴비기 규칙을 되는 끼와자 셴을 끼와래라고 기기래서라 지산 호주 셴을 끼위 김선디게 디서라랑 제부 코로나에 마행경기 규 셴바지라 코로나에 셴비 규칙을 되는 끼와인자 셴을 끼와래라고
It's widely accepted that production comes from other. Buddhists, not just Prasangika, but non-Prasangika, so the Svatrantika, the Chittamarchans, the Sautrantikas and the Vaibhashikas, they all accept that a result is produced from a cause. Non-Buddhists too agree that results are produced from causes. There's no one that will say the seed is the barley. Moreover, they will accept that the seed is other than the barley, or the barley is other than the seed. So non-Prasangikas and non-Buddhists, they do agree that barley comes from a seed, and that seed is other. And likewise with examples other than barley, they accept that the cause is not the result, and that the seed is not the result. So they will accept that the child is not the mother, and the apple is not the tree, when the tree is not the apple. So this is widely accepted.
Now, konzu icheba najin tengyu bige laguru wa de bene tebu di koron jebu koron mai bi gyuchi le de kewa le laguru wa bene jebu ke di koron le mai gyuchi le kewa wa tengyu ba 제부 세대 애플 세대 애플 코 많이 배 행동 지를 깨어와 텐주베는 애플이 행동을 하기 말와 행동도 애플을 하기 말와 제상 konzu 대지 konzu게 랑주 만지기 신 애플이 셴을 깨어를 랍디 애플이 애플 많이 비게 애플의 셴배 행동 지를 깨어를 했어 디자 셴을 깨어를 해라고와 지난 텐주비양 콘도 라바나신데 케링그로와 그래서네 애벌디 애벌 마이게 샴바 신도지를 깨와레스 제 이나 델레 샬레 깨와레 교마레스 텐주비딜라 거다 애벌레 샴비 신도지를 깨와레베스네 레스 결혼도 라바나신 레스 이나 결혼 중에 나신 샬레 깨와레 랍교마레스
What has been said thus far, Prasangikas will say something very similar. They, like the non-Buddhists and non-Prasangikas, agree that the cause is not the result is not the cause. For example, the apple is not the tree is not the apple. So this they accept. So here we're not seeing any disagreement. But Prasangikas say, whilst the result is not the cause and the cause is not the result, and we all say these same words, what you mean by production from other is not what we mean by production from other. So in brief, the words are the same, but Prasangikas say, we don't accept your meaning behind those words. We too use the same words, but we have a different meaning behind those same words of production from other.
That you begin Shanley Jawa Labio Mare Ladi, Shanley Kin Jig Maria said, Gunju Shade, Garrel Gunjigorasene, Jebu Coron le Shampi Gujile Jawa Zamgi Gunjigo Mare, Jebu Coron Mainke, Gushampachi Latine, Jawa Imba Zamgi Dizamgi, Shanley Kin Jig Maria said, Gunjigo Mare. That Gargunjigorasene, 결혼주기 제부 딜레 셴비 규질에 끼와세도 규티 결혼주에 간데 시작이도 남나 랑원의 주바디 시작이도 와서 랑원의 주비 규 시작이도 와서 제가 데네게 랑원의 주비 규 셴질에 띠네 끼람나 지금 말했어 제가 랑원의 주비 규 있나 그 유어 줘야 말했어 그 코롱원의 주비로 셴 수질을 못 되고 코롱원의 주선 유어균에 줘야 매게 됐어 제가 규딜에 제부 끼와라 규리 유어 친지 제부 끼고 와서 제가 규리 랑원의 주비 규지 있나 교화줘야 말해. 제가 될 제부기 말했어. 제부기 말했어. 제가 되면서 누구 제부디 랑원의 주비 규셴바질에 끼람나 지금 말했어. 결혼 쪽에 가서는 규셴바질에 끼와 되네 규디 랑원의 주바를 라기도 와서 랑원의 주바 인람나 다 교화줘야 매팅에 차게 돼. 교화줘야 매나 규디 교화 맞힌나 될 제부기 말했어. 제가 결혼 쪽에 라바나신 랑원의 주비기 규셴질에 띠네 끼와리 끼람나 디디 말해라 거다 랑원의 주비게 셴질에 띠네 끼 규셴에 띠네 끼람나 디디 말해서네 텐주비 까야 돼 셴게 가야 돼 딜레라 거래.
So from these words we can see there is agreement between the Prasangika and the non-Prasangika, but there has been alluded to that there is disagreement too. So where there is agreement between the Prasangika and the non-Prasangika is that a result comes from a cause and that cause is other than the result. They're not from the same nature. They're not cause. It's not causeless. Rather, where the disagreement comes is that the non-Prasangikas assert that the cause exists by way of its own nature, or to use a synonym, the cause is inherently existent. This is the part that Prasangika do not accept. Prasangika say, whilst we accept production from other, we don't accept what you mean by production from other, which is that the other, the cause, is inherently existent or existent by way of its own nature. That we do not accept. Because if it were existent by way of its own nature, it would be unable to change. Being unable to change, it couldn't become a result. So therefore, a result cannot come from an inherently existent cause, because if there were such a thing as an inherently existent cause, it would be unable to change into a result. So the point of disagreement is not on whether production comes from other. The point of disagreement is over whether the other, the cause, is inherently existent or not. What the non-Prasangika is saying, the cause is inherently existent, and Prasangika is saying That's impossible. It could not be a cause if it were inherently existent, because it couldn't change into a result.
Gyudi rangu muni tupe gyu shenpa chile kena da diga mare se dine kanga yongo se kaya di dire chezan shenje shenle kyewa ka se mato di mato ra koron tribu koron le shenpa gyu samla si kagyo mare she na donda la da zo ru jinga zoge da di ti she de kasan she de dirin she karasana shenji la tuyne gyudi na shenji la tuyne gyuwa dhone gyuwa dhoche an tribu tupu mato gyuwa gyune dhoye metegan kangla ma ba korong wone yue gyuwa gyune dhoye metindi gyu rangshin dhruba se rangshin dhruba de denpa dhruba se chegor chidan dela dene tribu kigu ma res dene chi inna nga zuge yarge dhoya ma res ora chidan dene inza da nga zu tengyubu korong zu du shimji che da kasan sheba ne chidan du zu kane shebe ne yana chashe la ba yana yula ba yana shenji le tuyne dhruba chi chagido was shenji le tuyne dhruba za shenji le tuyne ane yarge taa yue dheba dene chagido was chiza shen le tuyne dhruba za ko yuwa dhruba yore yuwa dhruba za ane gyuen seya da yun den dhruba tubu re se ora di sumura.
To summarize this point, because it's important to have this clear, Buddhists all accept production from the other, production from other, or to express it differently, results come from causes. Their argument is over whether the cause is inherently existent or not, and Prasangika refute or negate that a cause or other is inherently existent. So that, in summary, is where the disagreement is. Then to summarize what we've been looking at thus far, is we've really been talking about dependence arising and coming to understand it in varying ways, seeing it in different ways, as well as coming to understand its application more deeply. We've looked at this weekend and also previously dependency on causes, dependency on parts, dependency on imputation by mind, dependency on mutual dependency. So we've looked at dependency in many different ways. And the meaning of dependency is things change. Things change. If anything were inherently existent, it could not change. And where this is so important for ourselves from a spiritual point of view, if anything were inherently existent, it could not change, which would mean inherently existent faults could not be eradicated. If a good quality were inherently existent and one did not have it, one could not develop it because it's independent and therefore no causes would have any impact on it. Likewise with a fault. If the fault, such as an affliction, were inherently existent, through accumulating particular causes, one could not eradicate it because it's independent of causes. So therefore, as one reflects on dependency, not only does it serve to weaken our grasping, not only does it serve to transform our relationship with others, but we recognize that all faults of ours and others are dependent and therefore can be eradicated. All our good qualities and those of others are dependent and therefore have been developed in dependence on causes and can be developed ever further. So these are some key points that come about, that arise within one's mind through reflecting ever more on dependence arising.
Denige nawan nansui de ngadi nga rashin tuba siguro nga shi rashin tuba denigi dagana du sembe zimba de nga rashin tuba zimba se di lo de lokshe charo lokshe ro da nyomo jinjin nyomo tamje gi zewi gyu di ro da ya nga ji se de nga se de nga thank you bulla nga kala ma rang when to ba yo mare se pha ka ne ta nga se de kan chi yo re se ne phung phung nga bo kan chi pha lue pha ta ba zeng yo re se ming kya ta yue zeng de yue be nga se yo ba 제가 데니기 민견 따여 점도 요래서 병아디 유비디 요래서 별로디 데니기 가디 마세디 풍봉가 버 가르치는 뢰 받다 봐서 요래서 병아 준비 준비시 여러분 닐로 된저리 록셰 말에 풍봉가 버 가르를 되네 파라 뢰 따봐 점 유비가
The self, the I, the person, like all phenomena, appears to consciousness as being independent, or to use varying synonyms to express it differently, it appears to be self-existent, or existent by way of its own essence, or nature, or inherently existent. Then, that's how it appears. Then naturally, or spontaneously, innately, another consciousness grasps at the self that appears to exist in this way, as if it did exist in this way, as if that appearance is true or real, and that is grasping at true existence. Through analysis, one comes to recognize that the grasping at true existence is a wrong consciousness. It's not in accordance with reality, and that this wrong consciousness is the root cause of all afflicted minds. So the Prasangika, they say that when one seeks this independent self, one will not find it. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. It's empty of true existence, empty of existing by way of its own nature or its own essence. It's empty of being inherently existent. So that the self does not exist at all in the way that it appears. But Prasangika then further say, whilst the self does not exist at all in the way that it appears, it does still exist. And how so? As a mere imputation by mind onto the aggregation or the collection of the aggregates. And the consciousness here that realizes that the self exists dependently, that consciousness is factually concordant. The consciousness, now to go back, the consciousness that grasps at the self as being independent is a wrong consciousness. The consciousness that apprehends the self to be a dependent arising, this is a factually concordant consciousness. The self does not exist by way of its own nature, and the consciousness that grasps at it as existing this way is a wrong consciousness. The self does exist, though, as a dependent arising, particularly dependent on imputation by mind onto the aggregates, and the consciousness that recognizes this is not a wrong consciousness, but a factually concordant consciousness. So the self, the way the self appears to consciousness, no such self exists. But there is a self that exists, and that is a self that is dependent on imputation by mind. The self that appears to consciousness as being truly existent, that self doesn't exist. And true existence is the object of negation. The consciousness grasping at true existence is an object to be abandoned. So no such self, truly existent self, exists. The self that exists is the conventionally existent self. That is the self that is merely or only or just imputed or designated by mind onto the valid basis of the aggregates. Such a self exists, and the consciousness recognizing or realizing this conventionally existent self, this consciousness is a valid cognizer and is factually concordant. Whereas the consciousness that grasps at a truly existent self is a wrong consciousness.
Gachi da dile gangla ma do rang won yu be de gasa gachi da je di jimbi jimba de gasa da jin la gi de dele rang chi sin se ming ta go rang chi sin se de rang se da se de rang sa ji ba don da ji rang da se ji ba cha ro je sa de ni gi gachi gi da dele mi ne je ba jimbi lo di da rang chi sin sa cha rang chi sin di ba ja lo she cha da yang ang zo ge 대시 다 세드 파 풍봉가 보 간루라 때네 뢰파 따바 점에 탄이도 예배 다 지어로와 내래 대진비 대래야 야고 삼다디 디 제바 점으로 디다 대랑지 탄이도 예배 랑 제신사지 랑 제신차로와 탄이도 예배 다들 제바 점으로 디랑 제신사지 니로 된된 차고래 탄이도 예배 다 풍봉가 보 간루라 때네 파 뢰 따바 점 예배 다디 탄이세도 군줍다 탄이도 예세도 민파 따바제 탄이도 민기파 따바제 예바세로와 제가 민기파 따바제 예배 다들라 다들레 제바 짐바이네 딜로 된된 차거와 제가디 당한 저기 랑한지진 로디 노트리에서 조딩 안 주길 랑한지인데 가치게 다들 민네 랑한지진 삼는다 딜리용으로와 랑한지진 세디 교인 탐지 중세 녀모 탐지 중세 디리에서디 랑한지진디 다음에 조디 딜리용으로 가서 랑한지진 세디 가치게 다 랑들 미제 제바 짐불로 세디
The self that is the object of negation, the self that appears to be truly existent. So such a self does not exist. True existence and the grasping of true existence are to be negated. And the grasping of true existence is an ignorance of true grasping, or when the object is a self, it's called the ignorance of self-grasping, and they are synonymous. Another way of expressing the ignorance of self-grasping is a self-cherishing mind. So we can understand these two as being a different way of expressing the same thing. The ignorance that grasps at the self that the ignorance that cherishes the self-cherishing mind. So we can express this in different contexts, different words are used, but we can understand them to have the same meaning. Both of them are wrong consciousnesses. The ignorance that grasps at the self, in other words, the ignorance grasping at a truly existent self, is a wrong consciousness and the root cause of all our afflictions. To express it differently, the mind that cherishes the self is a mind that cherishes a truly existent self. And this is a wrong consciousness and is also to be abandoned. Maybe also shouldn't be said here, because these are just using this different terms to talk about the same consciousness. So in brief, the ignorance of self-grasping can be expressed as the ignorance of true grasping, which can also be expressed as the self-cherishing mind. These are wrong consciousnesses and are the root cause of afflictions, of all our suffering. Then moving on, the self that is merely imputed by mind, the conventionally existent self, the merely labeled self, this is the self that exists, and the consciousness that realizes or recognizes the conventionally existent self, the merely labeled self. This is a valid cognizer and factually concordant, because this is the way the self exists, as a mere imputation by mind onto the basis of the aggregates. That's the conventionally existent self. And the consciousness that recognizes this, that the self is merely labeled onto the aggregates, is factually concordant and a valid cognizer.
Chicken as a motor, Channel Pesha Shavan, Bendigo to some time, the motor side, the Cora Cheshire Canacan to Chia, do motor Cheshire the city, motor the Niguti, Nigimundo, Chesati Mania by Inzada, motor can shows in Cheshire Chasan, Dom, Sopatel, Lupa, Tapa, some you do Mado, and a Gala Matu, what I'm going to do by the Minduas and be some deep down with Tonet and to get nga se atang so su pumpo le rikpa jit ne ka ka ji tin jin jawa jua sam ta de ni ge lo ya nang chu di da kan nang gu du nang chu di da ni su ya kan du sim ju che de ye da zo ru chang ji di re da di ka su she de ka su di shi nang chu de ni su lo la na wa na xin de le ya mu yi ni su le ya kan du sim ju che de je ba che Dini jeba che yo ko Bendigo namsha de jeba che de ji yong lo je san de Bendigo jeba che de tame ta jo la ne Bendigo cha san den jin zhe wa lue pa da ba zhen yin ba cha guo du da gang lai ma de ba ran gong de ba de za wo yin de min du sen be ge da du sen lu li ge wo le ye de da zo ro chang de di re da de
When you go home and people ask you, what did you hear in your classes this weekend? You can say we continued to look at appearance and reality. We continued to hear and gain experience of how phenomena appear to consciousness, as well as then how to investigate to see whether the way they appear is how they exist in reality or not. The way of appearing, is it in accordance with the way of existing? We approached this through the illustration of a rosary and thereafter a car. And we spoke about how to take this understanding and apply it not just in meditation but in your daily activities, recognizing what object is appearing to consciousness and asking yourself, does it exist independently or dependently? So just like we saw with the car and the rosary, clearly dependent on parts, and you can look at it from another perspective and see that it's also dependent on causes. And finally, it is also dependent on imputation by mind. And we can apply this to all other phenomena too, in particular to the self. When you think, my car, so we can investigate the car, and if it can investigate the I that owns that car. Or, when you look at the rosary, also look at the I that owns that rosary. How does it appear? Does it exist in the way that it appears? And in this way, we continue to gain ever more experience of seeing that phenomena firstly appear to us as being independent, but nothing exists independently. And when we search, we can see that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence, but exist though still, but only dependently, as dependent arisings. So that in brief is, again, what we looked at this weekend. So thank you. We'll conclude there then for this weekend. Thank you.